Hello, and welcome back to A Journeyman's Travels. My name is Daniel Scheifler. Welcome. This week, we'll be discussing another of the first principles about retrospectives. Last week, we discussed that retrospectives must be intentional, encompassing both pillars of Scrum, that being inspection and adaptation. The next principle for retrospectives is that retrospectives must produce change. Now, when we say change, let us be clear. By change, we mean a change in the performance or the behavior of the individuals or the team. But that does kind of point out two curious elements here. You see, the change produced by the retrospectives actually is happening outside the retrospective. Now, while the team might select these changes to pursue, the actions are actually being undertaken by individuals. And these 2 points, that the change is actually occurring not in the retro, and that it is being done by individuals, not as a collective, is incredibly important. First, whenever you choose those behaviors, they're going to happen outside the meeting where the idea came up. They will have to occur either in place of existing behaviors or in addition to them during your normal day-to-day work. Now, if you've ever had that issue where you just want to keep doing more and more with less and less daylight, you'll understand this next point, and that's you'll need to keep in mind that the capacity for these new behaviors is going to be taken from the capacity your team's already using. And because they're new, not only are you going to have to account for the capacity just to do the behaviors, you will also need to account for the fact of the behaviors taking time to be learned. All right? And you'll also need to think about how you'll monitor them and check them, which itself is going to take a little bit of time as well. Because if you don't check them, if you can't state, I did them successfully, you can't improve. So in order for you to be able to improve, you'll have to try the improvement today and check them as part of your next retrospective. You can't let them just into the ether. And so this individuality of the actions being taken, or perhaps not individuality, but the individual nature of the person who must take them, and that they have to occur outside, needs to be kept in mind during the retro to account for these changes. Now, the model I often recommend for accounting for these changes is based on the idea of hypothesis testing, right? Like in science, we have this hypothesis, and we test that the hypothesis is correct by a certain expected result. Now, since Scrum rests on the idea of evidence-based management, this idea of a hypothesis test as an action item, the idea of discovering improvement by hypothesis, is actually a pretty natural fit. Most action items from a retrospective kind of follow from this already. They have this concept of let's try, and it always comes from something the team wants to fix. Hey, I bet we could do better if. Cool, just capture the details in writing. What are you trying to improve? What is it that you're trying? How long will you try this new action, and how will you know that it actually worked? These are the 4 pieces you need to know. What am I trying to move the needle on? What action am I doing to move the needle? How long am I going to try? Because sometimes those actions aren't going to finish in a week. You might need 3 sprints to really tell if the action will make a difference. And then the last, of course, is what specifically are you going to measure? What change is it that you're going to look for in the needle that makes the difference? But let's walk this idea out with eyes wide open. Not all changes are guaranteed to be improvements. Certainly most of them should be, because if we're guessing and guessing badly, that would kind of be counterproductive. But the idea that we'd only ever hit native peaks and continue on into higher and higher goals is a little naive. And it's going to set us up for a lot of disappointment. There is no such thing as endless peaks. You can continue to improve on something like a ratchet, but that comes from when you make a change that did not produce the positive results. You change back. And you acknowledge it for what it is. Eyes wide open. A change could produce positive results, but it could be so difficult that it's too expensive and it's not worth the trade in value. And that also is okay. That's the nature of the results, but you have to keep in mind the cost to achieve them. And both of them need to be monitored actively. There's an interesting moment in Henry Ford's autobiography where he talks about how his research and development department works. He chooses not to keep records of failures. because he doesn't want to discourage the bright young men he has working in that department from trying something. Because what might have been tried in the past may not be what's about to be tried in the future, even if it looks superficially similar. This idea of intentionally forgetting how the failure came about is a little contentious, but it demonstrates something I think most teams need to keep in mind. Just because you tried something before doesn't mean that it's going to fail again. What you need to cultivate an awareness of is whether the circumstances have changed. In particular, be cognizant that a new tool, new people, more maturity in the team's other processes might change the cost equation of an action. Which is why you need to keep both the nature of the results and their cost in mind. Because if you don't understand what caused the cost to be so high, you'll likely never try a potentially promising change again in the future. Certain changes are just infeasible with the level of maturity a team has at the moment, right? I cannot expect to extend super high degrees of trust to every junior engineer for design because they don't have the experience for it, right? That's not fair to them. That's setting them up for failure and setting the team up for pain. So the changes have to keep in mind the individuals. But this also allows us to highlight another peculiar instance, right? Is the change for the individual or for the team? According to the Scrum Guide, the retrospective is for the team to decide and identify actions that could possibly improve their performance. And as a result, we need to understand that these changes, while they might be individually applied, are for the purpose of improving the team. So when we think about monitoring and evaluating changes, right, that needs to deal with how each member is applying their change. Right? We need to evaluate it against some standard, and the goal is for the team to change where it is, to change how they're performing. Now, if my goal is ahead of me, and I move ahead of me, that's great. If I move ahead and to the right, is that better? Not necessarily. But if my goal is ahead of me to the right, then yeah, that's a great move. And moving ahead and to the left would be terrible. We need to keep moving. But you need to keep in mind that each of us is a constellation around where the team is supposed to be. There's a certain, not necessarily a center of gravity, but something like that, where the position of each of the team members on the scale of maturity and practice changes how well the team could be performing. And it's their joint performance, which is the thing that is of importance. And so it may be that the team changes how it takes on work for, say, the developers to improve the QA's performance, because the QA's performance is the bottleneck for the team's overall performance. And it becomes increasingly important that as your team matures, they bear this in mind. We cannot all change the same way. For example, if I need the quieter voices to come up and speak, it may mean that I need the louder voices to take time to listen. Because there's not enough time in the meetings for everyone just to raise their voice. And if everyone is talking over each other, we never learn. We never communicate. As a result, we really do need to change and deal with how each of us behaves on the team, right? It is the team that needs to progress towards the goal. And certainly that means that some individuals are going to move directly towards the goal too. But if changes altered behaviors, not all of the members of the team will have the same change. Everyone on the team has a contribution to make. Some are more defined, at least initially, by their roles. Say the developer, the QA, the product owner, etc. And that's where the teams usually start. But as they mature, there will be need to fill the gaps. Because the team needs to get where they're going, but all of us have to get there too. Every individual has to become accountable, not only for our own work and actions, but for the results that has for the team. The developer's not done when the story enters ready for QA. The QA is not done when stuff goes from refinement into development. No, in fact, their work has just barely begun. And the whole team isn't done until the PO has stated that this story is accepted and we have successfully delivered to the customer. After all, we haven't delivered value as a group until that unit of functionality is available to someone to buy. Now, stuff happens. And so everyone working on their work, yeah, there will be days when a developer might have trouble, or the QA might have trouble. And so it is appropriate for the teammates to jump in to critical work to help it get it through on time. Now, if this continues on for a long time, then we're into the territory more of keeping accountability for performance and less of teamwork. But if everyone on the team is actually doing their work to a reasonably approximate degree of their best, it may be appropriate for us to talk about the kind of complementary changes in behavior that some adjustment to the team may require. For example, if the team wants to improve throughput, they may find out that the bottleneck is on the QA, that there is a large burden of testing. And so in order to get things to flow smoothly, the team might have the QA focus on setting up test documents in templates to improve their work rapidity. And the team themselves, the developers, at the same time might shift some of the burden into unit testing and have it carried by the developers. Or we might pause and instead of having the developer go take on a new story, spend time helping the QA to automate a test, with the interest of the team focusing on flow and throughput, and that producing two different actions for two different groups. But when they are executed together, they yield the change in the team's performance, improved flow, improved throughput, which moves us towards the goal. Retrospectives must produce change. And absent change, they are a waste of time. But not all change is the same. Not every individual on the team will take the same change. In fact, it must be complementary so that the team advances, not merely the individual, provided that all the individuals are already doing the best what they can with what their current skill set is. And of course, that highlights that the changes we're talking about are going to occur outside the retrospective and are going to be enacted individually. We need to account for that because individuals changing behavior takes time, both in terms of learning the new behavior and changes to what they're already used to doing for productivity. There's some frustration cost, there's some adaptation cost. And we need to be cognizant of that because the rewards for a given action may cost so much that they're not worth the trade. Herein lies the value in making certain that as we take on these ideas for change, we write them up as an experiment. What is it that I want to improve? What is it that I think I will try to do this? How long should I try to give an accurate result? And what change am I looking for to know that the impact I wanted was made? These changes need to be as intentional as the retrospective themselves, even though they're being worked outside that meeting. These retrospectives must produce change in order to be really of any value to anyone on the team. Even if all of their actions may be slightly different, it is the coordination of action by a team after our performance has hit its peak that will really make the impact for what we could do with a retrospective. As always, thank you for joining me on this trip in A Journeyman Travels, and I hope you join us again next week. Goodbye.